The number of statistics that Actiware can generate is significant, and you have control over which statistics are going to show up in statistics tables or on specific reports. The most common way of changing these is by going into the Tools and Options menu and selecting the statistics you want in order to update your particular report, for example. So I'm going to go to Tools and then Statistics, and you're going to see this is a list of all the statistics that can potentially be created and included in a statistics table or in a report by Actiware. So you can see there's a ton of these here. Now, not every device does all of these, and you can see some of them are specific. For example, you'll see a whole series of score statistics that are specific to the score devices. You can turn on and off any or all of these, and we'll go through and we'll just make a quick setting for the common settings for, say, an Actiwatch 2. That's a good way to start. So I'm going to go ahead and deselect all, and we're going to start from scratch here. So the first thing to know is that you have, in the case of an Actiwatch 2, you don't have score statistics. You don't have a lot to worry about there. If you have an Actiwatch Spectrum Pro or an Actiwatch Score, you do have those options, and those will make sense for you when you have those devices. So we can kind of rule out this part of the screen. When we go over here to interval information, every device is going to have this as something of concern. This is the information about the individual intervals of significance that you want to score. So these would be for your sleep intervals or rest intervals. What information about the interval do I want? And so usually what you want to see here is something like start date and end date. That's at least that's a minimum. Days and times are helpful and useful. I think times are often really helpful because in many cases, like in the case of a rest interval, that's your bedtime. Rest interval start is bedtime, rest interval end is your get up time. So those are good things to have. Now if you want to look at days of the week versus weekends, you can select days as well. That's not always a requirement. And duration is kind of nice sometimes if you just want to see how long people were in bed. That's doable too. That's an easy one to check and have involved. So that's a good one to check. So I usually have those 5 checked when I'm working with this. The next one is really the area about off-risk status. So this is for Actiwatch Spectrums and Actiwatch Spectrum Pro and Plus only. Actiwatch 2 doesn't have this, so we're not going to worry about it. But if you have those other devices, you can indicate how much time was spent with the device off-risk, etc. Those kinds of things. They're pretty self-explanatory. For the activity statistics, you have the option of including these in your outputs. Now, if you're really just interested in sleep information, then these aren't probably going to be too important for you. But if you really want to understand activity as well, you have options here for totals, averages, standard deviations, max, those kinds of things. So, but for most sleep-related applications, you're not going to really need those. I'm going to leave them blank. You get to sleep and wake statistics. That's where things get interesting because there's a lot of statistics here that are of interest. Typically, what we'll find is that sleep time, just total sleep time during the interval is helpful. A lot of times total wake time, even though it's just the duration minus the sleep time, it's helpful to have it calculate. Percent sleep and percent wake are nice because instead of absolute values, you get relative values, and so those can be very helpful from time to time. The number of sleep and wake bouts can be very useful and interesting. Sometimes just the number of wake bouts is something that people want to see how disturbed sleep might be. The other options you have here are how long are those average particular bouts of sleep or wake. Are they short? Are they long? That can be helpful from time to time. Not always of interest, but from a basic use perspective, I'm not going to select those here. Onset latency is one that typically is of interest to folks. How long is it taking folks to fall asleep? Snooze time is kind of the other end of the spectrum. How long does it take folks to wake up? Once they wake up, how long does it take them to get out of the bed? That's not as interesting for most researchers, but it's something that's there for you. Sleep efficiency and WASO, I think, are pretty self-explanatory for folks who do this for sleep purposes, so those are good things to have. And then we talked about invalid times. We talked about off-risk times, and invalid times for means, is there any time when the device was recording values that were way out of whack? And those usually aren't an issue. Mobility statistics are kind of like the activity stats. The difference you have here is that the mobility just means are they moving or not. And so you'll see things like immobile time and mobile time. Are they moving? Are they not moving? Percentage of the time. The number of bouts, kind of like the wake bouts. Most of these make sense. You start getting down here to the bottom, and actually there's a bunch of things that are calculated for the fragmentation index. That takes a little bit of time to explain, but essentially it's kind of an index of restlessness. It takes into account how many immobile bouts that are of 1 minute in duration are there. So people may be sleeping for just a minute or two at a time before they're waking up again. So it takes into account movement and those short immobile bouts. It's something that there is another video, a little PowerPoint on what that all means and how it's calculated, and I'd invite you to have a look at that one if you have more questions. The last thing, we already talked about the score stats, is the light statistics, and this is just looking at the white, green, red, and blue options. Now, in the case of Actiwatch 2, you don't have red, green, and blue, so you wouldn't select any of those. But for white, you might just want to see, I just want to see the total exposure during the course of the time period of interest. That's all I really need. If you need max values or max values or standard deviations, those are great. TALT, time above light threshold, just tells you how much time the subject spent with light above a certain threshold value that you set in the analysis tab. So those are really the options that you have for the statistics table. Now there is an advanced button here, and when you push that, you can turn on or off the enhanced sleep statistics. This is something that was an effort to really correct for very, very restless sleep, and so my recommendation is that you really don't utilize this unless you're working perhaps maybe with an obstructive sleep apnea population. That would be specific for them. It's some correction factors have been put in place for that circumstance, and it's something that unless you really have a need for that, I don't recommend you use it. So that's where those kind of stand. So once you've got these set and you hit OK, then all of your work that's going to go from there on out for your statistics tabs are all going to contain the statistics that you've selected in that particular window. So should be good to go with that. If you have any questions about the statistics table or statistics that are calculated by the Actiwatch, you can certainly contact us by email at respironicsservice10@philips.com or call us at 1-800-685-2999. Thank you very much, and enjoy your Actiwatches.